And when they say brand identity, it's what identity do you have? Is it more luxury? Is it more Walmart? But it's just important to understand the feelings you want to convey to the people that you're talking to. I want to thank Andrew because images are absorbed 60,000 times faster. And so when Andrew hired me for a stage, what does this story convey to you if I'm on this big stage that Andrew used to be a part of, you know? But as you start looking at your LinkedIn profile, Instagram profile, your resume, start thinking about what images, what photos, what videos, what words, brand names, and numbers convey your identity as a brand. For me, I want to know that my brand is about service. My company is called Maven Group, and it stands for Mondays at the Mission, and that's a homeless youth program I started at the largest shelter in the United States, where I invited people like Elon Musk. So if my brand is about service, about giving, then does my actual brand name, i.e. Maven Group, convey that? Now, the alternative of this is someone's going to Google you. And this sounds very harsh, but we're all adults, so I think you'll be okay, right? Someone's going to Google you. You're either going to be invisible, visible, or an expert. You can't say, oh, but that's not my full name, or you have to add another name, or you have to add my surname. It doesn't matter. Like, someone's going to Google you, and you're either going to be invisible, visible, or an expert. So when you objectively look at yourself, do you convey your expertise? And the simplest thing for you to do if you want to start raising your brand awareness globally, you start posting more YouTube videos. And if you say you're one of the top speakers in networking, and you post it on YouTube, since Google owns YouTube, you'll already start propagating your videos of you as an expert on YouTube, which will be Googleable so that you're an expert. It's simple, but know that people will Google you, and do you want to be perceived as invisible? No one does, right? But we live in a world, we all do this, don't we? When you meet someone, oh, let me Google that person. Let me check their LinkedIn. But I have to tell you, it's really hard to build a brand if you don't understand what elements. And now these are just various categories of either my clients that have earned the PhD or myself, which took me 2 years. There's many ways to build a brand, but frankly, the easiest way is just to be an international speaker. Now, you may or may not want to be a speaker, but the fact that if you're on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or anything, and if you have one person outside your home country, you're already technically considered an international speaker. I'm going to say that again. If you speak on a platform, on social media, which all of you should be doing, whether you have a company or not, it raises your profile. Now, if you don't have these various labels or identities, you're just going to be put together with everyone else. Because as soon as you say you're an international speaker, you have a perceived expertise about something. Now, with my clients, I'm very straightforward with them. An expert for me is just something that you know more than someone else. So let's say I have an entrepreneur who has an Airbnb. She has one Airbnb. Now, is she perceived as an expert? But I say, well, if you focus only on people that have 0 Airbnbs, so you know more than that person. Now, I get that corporations are very different from solo entrepreneurs, but the point is, these are all various things that if you're in a company and you're featured on Forbes, will your boss or your executive see you in a better light if you were not featured? Because ultimately, you're vying for that job that someone else might be wanting for, but the more you have these various things, I mean, really, being an international speaker, helping you stand out matters. When I did work at American Express, I actually volunteered to speak at the compliance department at a bank, and that raised my profile that even though I was an employee at the time, it gave me an understanding that, wow, if I stand up, speak up, and share my truth about what I know, I'll have a higher profile, I'll have a higher probability of being promoted. So regardless whether you're an employee or an employer, be very mindful that just saying you're a speaker is important, but just knowing that the quickest way to do that also is what they call borrowed credibility. So even though, yes, I have written 7 books, and yes, I have done this for 20 years, if you want to do what a lot of experts do, they'll say things like this. According to Dr. Ron Burt from the University of Chicago, he found that your network is the #1 best predictor for career success. So let's say I never wrote a networking book. I don't travel the world, but I say according to a doctor from University of Chicago, it's called borrowed credibility. So you go from you sharing your opinion to you saying that this is a doctor that's reputable. Or if I say, according to McKinsey, consumer-driven marketing is 31% more effective than other advertisements. And all consumer-driven marketing is testimonial. If, let's say, you go to a restaurant, you go online, you check the reviews, it's like a 3.2 stars. No one's going to want to go, right? But what I'm saying is, if you are at a company and you want to get promoted, you can say how awesome you are, but if you have your colleagues saying, oh my gosh, Michael is one of the best executives I've ever seen in my life, you're elevating your brand, you're elevating your credibility, where someone else is saying how awesome you are, and that's 31% more effective in sales, according to McKinsey. So what I'm saying is, even though you might think that you'll be an imposter, because if you don't want to be a speaker, but if you want to actually be promoted and you want to find more clients, referencing actual science or doctors or McKinsey will allow you to elevate your brand so you sound very reputable. Does that make sense? Everyone does it, by the way. You go to Kinko's, and it literally says, color copies are 42% more effective in marketing. This is like Staples or Kinko's, okay? So all companies do it. You might not see it, but I'm dissecting what they do because I see so many people that are at their jobs who aren't getting the raises or the promotions they want because they don't understand how to elevate their brand. Or I know companies and employers and entrepreneurs that want to find the best clients, find the most premium opportunities, but they don't get the fact that their perception online is not very good. Does this make sense? And these are simple ways. Post more videos, share more examples. And for me, I didn't know this, but when I wrote my first book 20 plus years ago, it took me 8 years. I was all excited. I had a website. I was going to be a speaker. I was going to travel the world. It didn't happen until many years later, when I realized, when I met a 22-year-old college dropout named Tyler, who's still a good friend of mine to this day, I've known him 10 years ago. He wrote a book on networking, got a #1 bestseller on Amazon in 3 months. And when I dissected what he did, I'm like, okay, as long as you get a #1 bestseller on Amazon in one specific category and you're branded as a #1 international best-selling author, then boom, everyone wants to talk to you now. I'm the same guy. That book took me 8 weeks, but I learned from a branding expert in marketing for books, and all of a sudden, Inc. magazine wants to profile me. And I remember talking to Anita, I don't know if she's here, but she became the only black woman to have a fund in the entire state of Texas. So even though she had all this experience, she didn't really have much of a brand. As soon as she has the only black woman in all of the state of Texas with her own fund, boom, everyone wants to talk to her. Again, it might sound fluff or harsh, but we live in a world that we're in the most distracted world in human history. Your competitors aren't the other brands. Your competitors are Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Hulu, Netflix, Google. Anything that pulls your client's attention from you is essentially competing against your brand. Does it make sense? So if you don't hook them in with things that are authentic but are realistic, it's hard. Something like this. Has anyone ever heard of Davos? So I've been to Davos a few years. It costs like $100,000+ to get a membership. And ultimately, you have heads of states and presidents and billionaires like Ray Dalio, who has the highest and most valued hedge fund in the world. This might sound very cheesy, but the fact that my friend Habas works for a machine learning company, and he takes a photo with Ray Dalio, and based on science, it's called success by association. So though I'm saying that he went to Stanford University Business School, and he's an executive, but when you take a picture with Ray Dalio at Davos, you're already associating with a high-level thought leader brand based on one photo. So when you think about the photos, again, you place on your LinkedIn, you think about the videos you place, all that matters in terms of the people that are watching you, and people are watching you. Your boss is watching you, your clients are watching you, and they're going to make a perception. And hopefully that perception is a positive one and a higher value one because that matters relative to your opportunities. And I said this to you before. When I started speaking over 20 years ago, people could ask me, Christopher, how do you become a speaker? How do you go on these stages? How do you book speeches? How do you charge for your speeches? And I said, it's all about how you frame your story. Why does Ferrari cost more than a Fiat? Is it really that impressive? It looks kind of flashy, but if you know who has bought a Lexus and a Toyota, at one point, the engine in a Toyota was the same one as Lexus. It's just that Lexus has a more luxury brand. Make sense? And it's all perception. I'm going to dial deep into how every word counts in your own personal brand. And I mean this literally. So my clients come to me and say, Christopher, I want to start speaking more. I want to start getting more clients. I want to start reaching more premium clients at a premium price. Please help me. I'm like, okay, every word counts. Anyone in this room can be a coach. Whatever expertise you have, you can be a coach. Maybe you make a few $100s per hour. As soon as you say you're a speaker, now you just add another zero. Because again, speakers are perceived as having more of a higher brand recognition. But if you say you're a national speaker, it's even better. If you say international, even better. But if you're a Fortune 100 global speaker, you're at the top tier. All I'm doing is adding a few words, but each word you add adds to your brand. It sounds very simple, but it matters, whether at your company or for your company. And I didn't realize this at the time. When I was more naive, more unaware, I thought it was all about my content. It was all about my message. It was all about my story, and maybe a little bit of my cool hair, right? But it really wasn't until I hooked them in by saying, #1 bestseller, Entrepreneur Magazine. It just hooks them in because, again, people on stage, they need to convey their point to you. And so what I didn't realize, what your brand really determines your price points. And going back to, if you work for a company, remember your own brand, because your brand is what your actual customer is going to remember. Like, I'll work with someone like Merrill Lynch. Merrill Lynch might be a great brand, but if you're a wealth manager, they care about you as a personal brand. I think I meet so many people that forget that just because you work for an established company means nothing for your clients. They're just so used to it. And I really know that they don't want me to say this sometimes because it's like insurance agents and wealth managers and real estate agents, when they approach various people, they don't realize they just lump them together. So even though in their mind, yeah, UBS and Wells Fargo and Citibank, they're all prestigious brands, but they're just going to see you as one of those other wealth managers, because I get approached all the time. You know, so just be mindful that you want to be genuine, you want to be authentic, but know that all this stuff matters because literally it's valued. Your brand is valued. And the core thing, which I have alluded to briefly, is what I call a boss bio, where every word matters. And I'll go through literally a few of these things where I've literally charged thousands of dollars for a bio, and I'll show you why. Where if Shelly is one of my clients, her actual bio before she met me was she's a power connector. She believes that her future success is probably hiding in her next person she meets. That's not a bio. That's more of a mission statement. A bio conveys weight, substance, and credibility. Her bio is now founder and CEO. But notice how I added that she has successfully helped 8,400 entrepreneurs. If you have a business, would you not want to hire Shelly? She's helped 8,400 entrepreneurs online, as opposed to she's a power connector. Simple words have profound impact. I'll give you 2 more examples, and then we'll end this, okay? This young man was in his 20s. His actual bio on LinkedIn, mind you, was just holding a trucking company. But I did a little makeover. Again, founding and managing director. Notice how it's consistent. He managed a $50 million property, and then I also add these part of the community that I'm part of, right? But you go from holding trucking company, which has like zero credibility, zero branding, zero identity, to like, wow, this guy is a very impressive executive. Now, mind you, he's only in his 20s, okay? The last example, I changed his name just out of respect. This gentleman has built not 1, but 2 unicorn companies. And his initial bio is just very generic. And mind you, this guy is a legit pioneer. It took me hours to research the bottom part where he legitimately helped play a pivotal role in the trillion-dollar e-commerce industry. So if you're going to hire an executive, if you're going to hire a speaker, are you going to invite Terry Winters, the top person, successful entrepreneur, or Terry Winters, who's a legitimate tech pioneer? It's an obvious question I'm asking you, but I want to challenge all of you after this event, after this presentation, objectively look at your Instagram, your LinkedIn, your Facebook. I have people ask me all the time, well, Christopher, I have a personal Facebook and a professional one. Your client, your investor aren't going to care. They're going to Google you, and whatever pops up is what they perceive of you. Remember that. There's no personal professional. Everything you see on my social media is all professional. Whatever I put there, I know. I literally put an email at a conference in Duke University 20 plus years ago, and it's still came up with things from 20 years ago. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just saying it's just fascinating that once you have things online, it's there forever. So for those of you a little younger, be very mindful of what you post online because that sticks with you forever. Talk about a brand that sticks with you forever. Be mindful of that, okay? And the last thing I'll just share with is once you start having these various articles, which we'll talk more about with Martin in a few minutes, I'll be interviewing him. It's what I call a boss bio. But when I said earlier that you can actually quantify your brand, I never realized that these are just names, but when you include the story, it becomes a brand. Meaning Preston, his full name is Jeffrey Preston Bezos. Jeffrey Preston Bezos used to work at McDonald's in Miami, Florida. Imagine that. You're at McDonald's getting your cheeseburger, and you meet this guy named Preston or Jeffrey Preston Bezos, and now he's Amazon. Gail, this young woman, grew up in the South, was so poor that her grandmother made a dress out of potato sack. But you fast forward her life, her name is Oprah Gail Winfrey. And lastly, G, this little kid was teased, bullied, and punished in New York City, always told to be shut up, always said that he wasn't smart enough, wasn't bright enough, wasn't handsome enough, and G is actually me. G is my Chinese name. You know? It's like they're words on a screen, but once you frame the story of Jeffrey Preston Bezos and Oprah Gail Winfrey or Christopher G. Kai, immediately goes from just some random name you don't know about to an actual global brand that the personal brand of Oprah and Jeffrey and me is synonymous with my company brand. Does that make sense? And so the last thing I'll share is this. Your brand should convey who you are. I don't like showing this picture because brings back a lot of negative memories because it's very short. And I was the shortest kid in my class for pretty much all 8 years. But I show you this because if I want to convey authenticity in my story, which becomes my brand, you have to capture that. Don't be afraid to share some of your personal stories. The reason why Oprah is so powerful is because her personal story. If you look at Jeff Bezos, the guy's, he was adopted, his father was a drunk, and so all these personal stories bleed into their professional brand. And when I told you, you can literally quantify it. I would have never imagined that a kid growing up in New York City that was punished for talking too much in class can charge $30,000. I showed this only to tell you how ridiculous life is, when if you were here for 20 minutes, that was a $10,000 value. Now, whether you got that value or not, the way I frame my story conveys a value that actually is quantifiable. I hope you take this message with all of you, that you all have this amazing story, but when you frame your story at a more executive brand, you'll get more impact, more income, more influence, and whatever you want, it's just easier when people are coming to you instead of you going to them. Thank you so much for your time today. So next up, I have one of my colleagues, his name is Martin Rowinski, and I'm going to interview him for 20 minutes. He's an expert on executive branding. I talked about branding in general, but this gentleman has worked with over 20,000 entrepreneurs. He has a company called Board's Eye, where it's like LinkedIn on steroids, where he connects corporations with executives that want to be board of directors and board of advisors. And if you are executives that want to be a board of advisor or board of director for a corporation, he connects you. It's a SaaS platform. He has, again, seen over 20,000 entrepreneurs. So I thought it'd be very inspiring and very informative to have him talk to you all on how to build an executive brand. How many of you want to build, well, you might already be executives, but how many want to raise your executive brand even higher than what it is now? Okay. So let's welcome up Mr. Martin Rowinski.
Thank you. Good morning, Barbados.
Okay, so I always love the personal stories. So Martin, if you wouldn't mind just sharing briefly with our audience how you ended up becoming this successful entrepreneur from like the origin story.
Yeah, so, you ended your speech with saying personal story becomes your brand. When I first shared my personal story, I didn't realize what I was doing. So I was very open, and Christopher was one of the people I shared it with on a podcast. So yeah, he is correct. It does become your brand. Also makes you a little bit vulnerable, but I'll tell you my story as quick as I can because it's a long one. So I was born and raised in Poland back in the 70s. So it was still a communist country. It's prior to the wall coming down. So as a kid, I had a really hard time. I'm not really sure where my thinking of freedom came from, maybe from watching TV, but I never understood why I had to do what the government teachers told me, and got myself in trouble a few times. I remember the year that I finally left Poland was the year that they were forcing us to learn Russian, and I did not want to learn Russian. I was already struggling with keeping up with my own language, Polish. So I'm like, there's no way I can do this. And they called my mom again, come down to a school. And that was probably the biggest motivator for my mom. She was like, I can't keep doing this. We got to get out of this country. So to escape communism, it's not as easy as, traveling. It is for US, for Americans, makes it very easy. You can't just buy a plane ticket and go. They wouldn't let you. So we basically had to lie that we were going on a vacation to Italy to visit my sister, and we were supposed to come back. But as soon as we got to Italy, we went to the U.S. Embassy and filed paperwork to come to U.S. So after 8 months of being in Italy, we finally made it to U.S., came to California, Bay Area is where I started off. So at this point, I was 10 years old. I knew how to speak Polish and a little bit of Italian and zero English. So I had to start over. Middle school is not very friendly. I don't know what it's like in Barbados, but I can tell you they're not friendly. Very mean, bullied, made fun of not speaking English. Got in a fight day one because I wore chick jeans to school. My mom had no idea what she bought for me. I outgrew every clothes I had. So she went and got some chick jeans, and apparently I started a trend because everybody wears tight jeans these days. So that was a long time ago. But that was me. So all the way up until college is kind of where I started finally opening up a little bit. But prior to that, I got bullied quite a bit, and it sheltered me. So for a long time, people told me, tell your story, write a book. It's a great story. And there's a lot more details and funny parts. You can ask me later if you want. But being in this country as a foreign person, and you hear these stories all the time, but the reason is when you don't have freedom and you're finally in it, you see the opportunities. And you're hungry for them, and you're willing to do anything to not be oppressed again or live the way that you grew up as a child. So I started entrepreneurship at 16 years old and had a lot of fails. I also worked for a couple companies, corporations, but I enjoyed being an entrepreneur. And 7 years ago is when we funded Board's Eye. And throughout years, I've also done a lot of consulting. So part of the drive of Board's Eye and what we do there is helping companies bring on advisors or board members. And the success that we have seen companies go from a startup to publicly traded or almost out of business to actually, getting funded over $50 million. Those are things that drive us to continue doing what we do. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah. Now, I want to make this conversation as relatable to all of you in this room, right? Like I said, if you're at a job, will elevating your brand to be perceived as an executive raise your probability of being promoted, right? And if you have a company, having that sense of executive branding, and it actually is a brand, right? So as I mentioned to you in the bio, Martin has seen more than 20,000 entrepreneurs across his business recently. What do you feel are some things that people are just completely clueless about in terms of how do they frame their story in a way that they are perceived as executives?
Over 90% of them don't frame it at all. They have great resumes. They don't even have a good LinkedIn, a lot of them. But outside of that, they are unknown. 10% have done a pretty good job. So what we have seen in 7 years, and this is part of the reason why Boardseye is actually taking an initiative of helping executives with executive branding. We call it part of our board preparation work. The reason for that is we've had enough data to look over the last 7 years, and after sending, I'll just give some random numbers, say 50 executives that all 50 of them I would call qualified for this board position to a company. They review them, they take anywhere from 3, 4, 5 months. They might even ask for more. At the end of it, they come back and say, okay, we want to interview these 5. So we've had that happen time and time again, and always wondered, well, what was wrong with the other 45? They were all awesome resumes, great executives, have done well for themselves. They can bring a lot of value to that company. So we finally started digging in, and we did what the companies were doing. We didn't realize they were doing this. They were doing Googling. First thing they did when they looked at their resume, yes, they scanned it, yeah, they read about it, but you got to verify it. Anybody can write anything on a resume. So they started Googling. So the 5 people that they would normally pick were the people that have written articles, maybe have written a book, but in any shape or form, they have established themselves as a leader in that industry, as a thought leader.
And again, Google is both your friend and your foe. But there are specific ways that Martin has helped his clients with, which all of you can utilize, where again, the quickest way for you to be featured, there's an actual website called Haro.com, H-A-R-O. It's called Help a Reporter Out. You have all these writers for large corporations and publications that want sources. So if you're an expert, you can literally get featured on these articles by just going to Haro.com. But all that matters because, I don't know if you heard the numbers, 22,000 executives, 90% are not very marketable. That's 18,000 people. And even out of those 50 people, 45 no, 5 yes. So we live in a very competitive world, but I wanted to really pull some of these great tips from Martin to just teach you all, hopefully, how to get featured or even write books, right? And so what is the most telltale sign when you started investing in various things of raising your brand, what you saw immediately? So
the immediate sign was after I did my first podcast and our employees started, in all their emails, they would leave it in their signature. So there was a link to my podcast. And then they would get on a phone call with them on an appointment, going over what we do. Do they want to join the network? And all of a sudden, random people just were like, I just watched the podcast. I understand how everything works at Boardseye. I'm ready to sign up. You don't have to tell me anything. I'm ready to go. And then that's when we started noticing a simple thing like a podcast that somebody took their time watching 20 minutes, 25 minutes, opened up a door for us to make the process very easy. Instead of somebody trying to explain it, they watched the CEO be interviewed, be vulnerable, and explain exactly what we do on a podcast. That was the first time we noticed how powerful branding can be.
And again, Martin has a podcast about leadership. Just the fact that his podcast is about leadership conveys an executive authority. Again, these things are very simple in thinking, but really, you can all do this because since we do work with a lot of executives, oftentimes they think they're an imposter, but anyone can go online right now and say you have a leadership podcast and just upload things on YouTube and just start. There really is such a low barrier of entry now that anyone can do it. And when you do this, you'll start seeing how much more perceived value you have, and it really is perceived value. So I remember you telling me this many years ago, Martin, that one of the best ways to get experience as a board of advisor or board of director for a corporation is actually to find nonprofits that you're passionate about and become a board advisor there. So tell us a little about that.
Yeah, so a lot of times we'll work with an executive that has never done any board work. Um, we're also adding in our board preparation stages, not just branding, but we're also adding education just to prepare the executives for serving on a board. But one of the things we always recommend is there's so many nonprofits out there. Find one that you align with, and most likely they will not say no to a new board member that can bring value, but get on the board, get involved. It's very similar work, whether it's a nonprofit or whether it's a publicly traded company or whether it's a private company. The board work is very, very similar, and it looks great on your resume.
Great. And let's talk a little bit about, I asked you this actually before our conversation right now. Why should people even want to consider being a board of advisor or a director? And I also wrongly assumed, I thought, oh, they're all older people. But you're like, no, actually, like people in their 30s are board of advisors. So why should people consider being a board of advisor, board of director for a company?
Yeah, I think everybody has obviously their own personal reason. Some are ego driven. I wonder the same thing, especially because I enjoy golf, as you know, Christopher. And every time I golf and somebody asks, what do you do for work? And I tell them right away, they're like, oh, let me get your number. I got to send you my resume. I would love to be on a board. I'm like, have you ever been on a board? No, but it's the next thing I want to do. Like, did you just come up with that, or were you always thinking that? So I know everybody has their own reason for wanting that, and part of it is status, and it's definitely the next, after you've reached a certain level, you're like, okay, I would love to be on a board. But I think if you really do a deep dive, it's a good way to give back. You've had success, whether it's corporate, whether it's you're an entrepreneur, you've reached a certain level. It's a good way to give back, but it's also a great way, if you are retired, a great way to stay active. You're not working full time. You probably have a quarterly meeting, maybe a couple of video calls, but you are staying active and you're still giving back and you're keeping busy. And I think we all learned maybe from looking at our parents or grandparents and how they would just reach a certain age, 55, retire, and then it's like they're not really doing much with their life. I think we're all right now traveling more, experiencing more, and I think that's just part of it, is just being active.
Depending on where you are in your career and your business, not assuming even this whole board of advisor, board of directors, right? If you know that the biggest companies in the world have actual board of advisor, board of directors, does that not perhaps encourage you to have your own board of advisors, board of directors, right? Just again, finding people that you need in your team that allows you to raise your credibility and your influence. And let's talk about influence, because I've seen Martin speak on various stages, whether at Princeton or with the founder and the CEO of Delta. And it's always exciting to see the impact you make. And specifically, let's say for younger students and people that are younger generation, when it's all said and done, yes, you have this successful business, yes, you do executive branding, but what is the feeling you get when you start speaking more and talking about what you do for a living? What are some things that you perhaps can encourage our audience to really know that it's fun, it's exciting? Like, what are moments or memories or stories that stick with you?
So I think in my career, I'm at that stage of I love giving back, and being on stage first time was not easy for me. Doing my first podcast wasn't easy for me, just because I was so sheltered, I think, through the bowling that I talked about. But it's gotten easier over time. But the biggest thing, I think, giving back for me is what I love. And when we spoke, or when I spoke at Florida International University, and all the students came. I mean, how long did they crowd us for? Hour, 2 hours? Literally just spent time talking one-on-one with one student, next to it. I mean, we were there for a couple hours, and I really felt a personal impact. It wasn't just, I hope I helped somebody. One person would be great, because you don't know, that one person might tell the story to another person, and then it spreads, right? But right then and there, getting that feedback was plenty for me.
That's awesome. Do we have time for Q&A? Anyone want to ask any questions for Martin? 2 minutes. Anyone have any questions about executive branding or branding? Again, if you have your own business, it's one frame of thought. But if you are an employee, it's different. But it's still about how do you elevate your presence so that whoever you want to impress will see and hear your expertise. Because again, Martin and I see it all the time. We have in our mind what we think that we are projecting in the world, and that's not what they see.
I have a quick story. Speaking of, if you're at a job and you're trying to promote it, why you should do executive branding. You should, by the way. And this goes back, since you guys are in the financial world, do you know who Sidney Weinberg is? Mr. Wall Street, director's director. Well, so a long time ago, you can look up his name. He was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. He has a great story. You should research it. He started actually as a janitorial assistant, got promoted to the mail room. Speaking of, our talk was called Mail Room to the Boardroom. And he reorganized the mail room and got the attention, and ended up actually becoming the CEO, and not only the CEO, but the CEO that saved Goldman Sachs. Great story. You should check it out. From nothing to being the Mr. Wall Street. Yes? So for us at Board's Eye, we actually don't do a deep valuation. We are what we call ourselves the corporate matchmaker. So every company will come to us and they'll give us a different list of who they're looking for. On average, it's 3 executives that they're looking to put on their board or advisors. We then go to our database, find those that match what they told us, and we send them. So every company does their own style of vetting. I know one of the first things they do is they'll do a background check, as in Google, so just a public check. After the first interview, if they make it to a second interview, I know they do run a background check, an official one, just to make sure there's no criminal records that are being hidden on Google. And typically, from there, they go to, if they make it past second interview, third interview is pretty much their final interview where they start discussing the offer, whether it's equity, whether it's paid cash, how many meetings, basically all the details of the contract. But as far as the actual vetting, we at Board's Eye do not do it. We only vet them on their resume and see if they have potential for some of our clients. Sometimes we might not have a perfect company match at that time, but we're very good at finding that. Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. And we are international. We've been working for the last 7 months with a company based out of Aruba. And I don't know the details on it. Again, we've grown from, working in a garage to over 200 employees. But I'm pretty sure that they're expanding into US, this company, because they hired on 3 board members and all 3 are US based. So, yes, we do work internationally, and we work the other way as well. We had a company based out of US that was actually looking at moving into UK, so we helped them connect with UK executives to help them get their feet on the ground there. So we do work both ways. We're in the process of, I don't want to say the name because it's not for sure yet, but aligning ourselves in a couple different partnerships, and one of them has a very big executive chapter in Asia and one other country I can't remember, and they asked us if we can go into those countries, and the answer is yes. So as far as smaller Barbados, you still have great success here. You still have great entrepreneurs, great executives, and you still have startups that probably could use your help. So it's just a matter of lining yourself up. So if we were, boards I was, to explore coming into Barbados and helping that process, matchmaking process, we could definitely do it, and we do it no different than we've done it in the U.S.
And to your question, which is a great question, by the way, there are various sponsors, let's say MasterCard and IBM. And so for those of you who are in Barbados or in the Caribbean area, it's still about associating with bigger brands, right? So let's say your mentor is from MasterCard, or you intern with MasterCard or IBM. So though, yes, you might be in a smaller market, the names like PwC, MasterCard, IBM are huge names. So be mindful that I have clients all around the world, and I always tell them it's less important about where you're from than who you associate with. So as long as, if you know that you're in a smaller market, but you attach your name with someone, even as simple as, oh, my business partner or my mentor, you never want to lie, but just like find ways to collaborate. I'm in communication with IBM in Barbados. I'm curious if you want to have a conversation with. Just saying that name, the brand name, because again, in the US, perhaps they might see, oh, you're from the Caribbean or whatever, but if you say, well, there are 44 million people in the Caribbean, which is the size of California, would you be open to having a conversation where you might be having an opportunity to invest in Barbados, right? It's how you frame the story. The bigger the numbers, the bigger the brands, and like, for instance, if I were in Barbados, that's literally how to frame it. Barbados has close to 300,000 people, but the whole Caribbean has close to 44 million people, which is the size of California. We already have various companies that have invested in Barbados or have worked with Barbados, such as IBM, MasterCard, and PwC. So just referencing those things already elevates you from, okay, maybe they don't know much about Barbados, but I've spoken in Dominican Republic and Colombia and now Barbados and various places of that smaller nature, but it doesn't matter. It's how you frame it. And again, when I get hired, I teach them how to frame their story. So I might say, Medellin is now one of the most innovative cities in the world, according to a Bloomberg competition. Dominican Republic, did you know that that's part of the $660 million LATAM market? So there's smaller countries, but there's weight to it, because what do investors want? They want opportunity. But if you frame it in the right way, it's so much more probable that whatever results you want, you'll get there quicker, faster, and better. Thank you so much for your time. Martin and I will be here afterwards, and so we really look forward to meeting you in person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.